technocracy was an idea invented in the 30s. And it was during a period when the capitalists had clearly screwed the pooch. And we're sitting in the middle of a Great Depression. There was a legitimate debate about how you should run a technological society, whether it's top down or bottom up. And the capitalists, of course, want bottom up. They want free market. And the Trotskyite types want top down. And we hadn't had the Soviet Union yet, so it was a completely rational way to think about it. We've got this new technological world. How do we run it? China is embedded in every facet of our society now. And that's the take-home lesson from Chaos Under Heaven, is that they have such a firm grip that it's like it's stage 4 cancer. I think the low-level retail hodlers have no idea they're part of a very big geopolitical game. What is this power grab? And that's where the book Technocracy, oddly enough, kind of pulls it together.
Dr. Dave Collum, good morning. How are you?
I am fine.
Great privilege to speak with you. I've been following your work for some time and appreciate your honesty and the depth of research that you conduct, and willing to sort of go against the counter narratives of this great media technocracy that we seem to be under. But you put me onto a book and the concept of looking at technocracy a bit more by Patrick Wood, Technocracy, The Hard Road to World Order. So it would be great to talk about that book and sort of your thoughts on technocracy. But before we get into that, just for those that don't know you, I know your reputation precedes you. Just a brief introduction of yourself and your background, both professionally and also, you have a huge research interest on the side that's very well followed as well.
Yeah. So I'm a upstate New York boy who, went to Cornell intending to go to first vet school, then med school, and then got sidetracked. And so with a degree in genetics under my arm, I went off to study organic chemistry at Columbia. Always been a bit of a rogue. And so you don't do that, for example, without being a bit of a rogue. It wasn't intellectual power or anything. It was just being a renegade. I then got lucky in grad school, got my degree very, very quickly, went right back to Cornell where I was an undergrad, and as assistant professor, and switched fields and went in I used to make molecules of the kind, like, for example, we've heard about a bunch of therapeutics lately. And, as a grad student, I would synthesize big complex molecules. And then I switched fields into studying how chemistry works. So more of rather than how to do something, how things proceed. And over the decades, I found that complex areas that I was involved in, that nothing ever held up. And that turns out to be consequential because it gives me this unique perspective of the world where even when the experts are trying to get it dead right, with no ulterior motives, they can often get it dead wrong. So I can stare at a bunch of experts who all share the same opinion. And if I have a superpower, it's the ability to not believe them. And part of it's because I believe there's a lot of liars in the world. And also because I believe that experts can just all be wrong. They get into a groupthink. So in any event, late 90s, I started paying a little bit of attention, first with markets, and then I got more interested in global issues. And now I'm pretty obsessed of the status of the world and what I would call a rising authoritarianism, rising at a breathtaking speed. If you asked me this time last year, I'd never have understood how far it would progress in one calendar year.
And now
here we are.
The book by Wood echoes a lot of others, surveillance capitalism, and going back to a lot of the classical texts. This is nothing new, but the power of technology and also in the last few years, last decade, the money that has gone into the billionaire class. It's just
where the the technocracy parts way. So I read Surveillance Capitalism by that woman. What's her name? Do you remember her name?
Shoshana Zuboff.
Yeah. I read that. Hers is this more passive thing where it's more about them monitoring us and knowing what we're thinking and stuff like that. As former Stasi members have said, don't believe for a minute that if they have the information on you, they're not going to use it. Technocracy is really right about them using it. And so it's a very dark turn in the plot line. What drew me to the idea, which someone tagged me on Twitter and said, "Oh, you should look at this." I've been looking for a unified theory of everything, in which I look at what's going on all over the world and saying, I don't understand it, right? And so I'm pretty quick to dismiss shallow analyses. So you can ask silly questions like, well, Biden's clearly not calling the shots. Who is? And people say, well, Obama is. I go, no, that's too simple, right? People say, why do we have inflation? They say we printed too much money. And I go, no, that's like saying we have drought because there's not enough rain, right? These are just really shallow analyses that don't bring much light to the discussion. And so I'm looking for the unified theory of everything that explains absurdities happening in every country at all times now, whether it's odd immigration patterns, odd central banking behavior, odd mandated health issues. You just everywhere you look, there's something happening that you go, I don't know why they're doing that. One of the things I've realized is that since the dawn of time, just because you don't understand why someone wants wealth and power, and you go, I don't understand why Jeff Bezos needs more money. I don't understand why the king of whatever needs more land, right? The evidence shows that those people always exist. And it goes back to the beginning of written civilization, right? That there's always been a person who just wanted more power for some, Harvey Weinstein level thing, and so you just accept that as the human element, and so then you say, well, what is this power grab? And that's where the book Technocracy, oddly enough, kind of pulls it together. I take it you read it, and it's not a brilliant book, but it's disturbing. Right.
Yeah, I found especially the chapters that pulled together. There's so many threads that we can go down with Technocracy, but pulling back the integration between the central bank digital currencies, looking at as a tool, and then the billionaire class, and then going back and looking at some of the Agenda 21. And the tough part is that you start mentioning these things, these disparate threads, and people go, "Oh, you're just conspiracy theorists," but it really,
I am. Men and women of wealth and power conspire. Anyone who doesn't think that's just a moron, right?
Yeah.
So if you're willing to call me a conspiracy theorist pejoratively, if anyone is, I'll just say, sure, you're an idiot, right? Yeah. You can sit there and marinate in your ignorance if you want, but I'm looking for the troublemakers and trying to understand what they're doing.
Well, and that's the thing. And one of the biggest ones was, still in the depths of COVID, we tune into the World Economic Forum, and you have Klaus Schwab, and the first speaker. Do you know who the first speaker was? The inaugural
Xi Jinping.
And that's
so any question that this is about going against China is put to rest right there. Right. So there's all these potential plots. I have all sorts of theories about what this is all about, but one could be, this is the West opposing China. And all of a sudden you go, nope, I don't think so. Not after that one. So the grand theory of everything requires explaining these odd, in the World Economic Forum, as you know, and as your readers and anyone who's been following your podcast, I'm preaching to the choir, right? You cover geopolitics as well as anyone I know. By the way, when we first made contact, you reached out to me, but then one day I got confirmation of something you told me, where boom, a newscast just flicked it, just boom, just a little tiny flicker. I'm trying to figure out what I can talk about, but and I go, there it is, right there. He told me something that that months later got confirmed. And so I said, okay, channels are open, wide open now. So China clearly is part of the plot now. Last year, I concluded at the end of the year that I was way, way, way underestimating China's importance. And as we talked about before the talk, China's like the hole in the air, right? It's like in the movie Predator, where all you see in the jungle is this schlieren, this blurriness, and you go, that's China right there. You get little tiny flickers of disturbance in the refractive index of the light, but otherwise you can't see the guy. And so I set out to understand China, and I read Josh Rogin's book, Chaos Under Heaven, which is a great book. And you can't read Chaos Under Heaven. So have you read that one yet? You're well read. You can't read Chaos Under Heaven without concluding that we're toast. I think that Josh Rogin does a brilliant job. And by the way, I'm kind of a Trump tolerant guy, and he hammers Trump, but he does it in a way where I go, I think he's right, and it's very scary. Trump got
still on one thread there, and let's go back to that. But what I found very unfortunate, and maybe we can get into the media bit later, is that Josh Rogin's book, Chaos Under Heaven, did not paint anyone in a good light. He was not a bit. And yet within the media elite, particularly on the left, he was hammered for being a Trumpist.
Really?
That's from what I could pull together.
I didn't even pick that up. That's appalling. That's a stunning. He hammered Trump for a third of the book.
Yeah.
In fact, I was told, Dave, you won't like it because he hammers Trump. And I go, I don't have a problem with someone hammering Trump. The guy's idiosyncratic. But what I have a problem with is when they hammer him because they simply hate him.
Yeah.
And one time, George Friedman's great book, America's Secret War. George Friedman, Cornell, PhD, by the way. He said, if you think any of the players in this global chess game are stupid, you're missing the plot line here.
Yeah.
So just because some guy has a wrap around his head and is living in the desert doesn't mean that guy's not a cunning bastard who knows exactly what he's doing. And I'm reading a book about Comanches. Those guys knew what they were doing, right? And so the leaders of the various tribes of the world are leaders for a reason. And so Trump got hammered, but the way Rogin hammered him was by showing in lurid detail how much Xi Jinping duped him, and how much he basically must have had a team of psychologists saying, okay, here's how you play the guy.
Yeah.
Right. That's my interpretation. Then again, to take that plot line just to where he takes the book, China is embedded in every facet of our society now. And that's the take-home lesson from Chaos Under Heaven, is that they have such a firm grip that it's like, it's stage 4 cancer. You can talk about taking out lumps of tumors, but it's everywhere. You're a lumpy mess.
Yeah, so that's a good way of putting it. And you wonder. I'm just going to pull up the definition that Wood uses for technocracy. Technocracy is the science of social engineering, the scientific operation of the entire social mechanism to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire population. I mean, this reads like something out of Xi's China, and yet we look around at a number of the policies being implemented, the chaos of global supply chain management, what we're looking at with every commodity, and some of the social policies being implemented. You go, book worth reading, and a concept worth looking into. How are you looking at the broad scope, and what are the three, four major channels that you look at technocracy and how they're colliding?
Well, so the thing that's I found spooky about technocracy is well before 2021. I think it was written around 18. Do I remember that correctly? Yep. Somewhere in there. Yep. And it's been talked about. So for the watchers who haven't read about it, technocracy was an idea invented in the 30s. And it was during a period when the capitalists had clearly screwed the pooch. And we're sitting in the middle of a Great Depression. And contrary to what the central bankers tell us, because they had a credit bubble in the 20s that burst. And the central bankers always say, oh, we didn't do enough in the 30s. No, you did too much in the 20s. It's very clear to me. But the capitalists have screwed the pooch, and there was a legitimate debate about how you should run a technological society, whether it's top down or bottom up. And the capitalists, of course, want bottom up. They want free market. And the Trotskyite types want top down. And we hadn't had the Soviet Union yet, so it was a completely rational way to think about it. We've got this new technological world. How do we run it? And I have this theory. You know how much the right hates FDR because he put in all these programs. I have this feeling that FDR was, wait for it, more of an insider than they're giving credit. Right? I mean, the guy was an insider. I think he knew, not to say that it didn't do some damage, but I think he knew that if he didn't do some major league compromises, that the capitalists would lose. And that he had to throw more than just a bone to the populace. And it was to save capitalism, right? What a weird idea for a right winger, but it makes sense to me. And so then what happened is he compromised. We brought in social programs. We brought in safety nets. The debate went away. And then lo and behold, we faced the next technological revolution, the digital world. And we've got AI and all these things. And now they're talking about, well, now that we have computers and supercomputers and the global internet and potential for digital currency, technology can finally run the world. And the way I like to describe it is when I read 1984, it was fiction because the way that they monitored the guy and everybody was not feasible. And then we invented the internet. The dawn of the internet, the day the internet went live, was the day that not only did the Orwellian world become a possibility, it might have even been an unstoppable foregone conclusion. That's a dark view, right? That's not an optimistic view. Or it's optimistic to these, let's just say, well, there's nothing we could have done, so whatever, we blew it. So now we've got these guys who are convinced the world should be run through the cloud. And the problem is they're egomaniacal, neurotransmitter seeking, power hungry bastards. That's technocracy. But disturbing things, here's what bugged me. The guy talked about how they would do it, and it's hauntingly accurate. So he talks about the how the idea of sovereign states are outdated. So, the metaphor people like to use is Hunger Games, with regions, and, it's kind of twisted, but did you think of Hunger Games when you were reading it? Because it kind of kept clicking. I'm going, so these guys seem to have this hive model where instead of having sovereign states where we get in these big brawls over borders, you have a hive model where you just have these regions that are under control of that are more local. So it's kind of a Ron Paul idea that's gone very bad. And so all of a sudden things that didn't make sense make sense. So you look at two of the most important issues of the modern era right now, and one is climate change, which I will tell your listeners, I was a believer 4 years ago. I did my homework. I think it's a complete hoax. I think it's a complete fabrication now. And I can make the case. I could be wrong, but I can make the case. I gave a talk on it in the New Orleans Investment Conference, came out of it unscathed. The second is COVID. And what they do is they turn the world's problems into a global collective kumbaya solution. And that kind of tears down the idea of sovereigns. There are no borders with COVID. There are no borders with global warming. And then all of a sudden you look at things like when the North Africans flooded into Europe. And I get it, these migrations occasionally happen, but there's a couple of things that are known. One is that the North Africans who had moved to Europe, and this is not meant to be a criticism, but North Africans and Western Europeans are culturally miles apart, right? There's a lot of zip codes between the two cultures. And one can argue one's not better than the other. We all have our opinions, of course, but they don't mix well. It's oil and water. And I think the evidence is pretty good that the North Africans who have emigrated to Europe have not assimilated. So this is not like Irish coming to the United States and to Canada and saying, I want to be an American. These are guys who don't want to be Europeans in the traditional Anglo sense. And so if I were a European leader, I'd be disturbed by multi-million body immigration wave that happened almost instantly.
Well, that's an interesting point, and you made a couple of points that I'd like to get back to at one point. But with regards to the Europeans, it's interesting to see the quote unquote rise of the nationalist right, and it's interesting how they're painted as the nationalist right, not we need to protect our nation state. We have borders, right. We have values, right. But
they're demonized.
They're demonized immediately within the institutional elite. And you're seeing that pushback. I mean, Le Pen in France isn't a fringe party anymore. You look at Alternative for Deutschland in Germany.
Well, central bankers are not national, right? The Federal Reserve does not work for the United States. It absolutely does not work for the United States. There might be guys in there who have a bias, but they work for global multinational banks. And therefore, they don't have borders. When Europe gets in trouble, the Federal Reserve bails them, right? That's how it works. So then you get this immigration wave, though. And what you see are the sovereign leaders just shutting up. You see Merkel just sitting there, not saying boo about it. And I think there was a Hungarian prime minister who said, no way, get him out of here. I don't want him. And he got grief. So this is kind of a sovereign border teardown moment. And then all of a sudden you go, wait a minute, now look at the United States. We've got the southern border. People say, again, the shallow analysis is, oh, that's because the Democrats want to strengthen their voting base. I go, all they have to do is rig an election or something, right? You don't have to bring in hordes of people who won't vote for a very long time to strengthen your base. By then it's too late. These guys think in, week and month timescales, not generationally. And so then the question is, what is that about? And I think it's about eroding borders.
I found Wood's book tied in a lot with Neal Stephenson's Snow Crash that he wrote in the 90s, where he got into the metaverse. I mean, this fellow is a Seattle native, I believe, and a fantastic book. And I think Wood lays out the accurate path. Stephenson laid out the fictional path that we're at now, the regionalism, the power of private public partnerships, and the massive amounts of money that private citizens now wield, where the politicians really can't get anything done unless they've corporatized themselves within the institutional hierarchy of the billionaire class.
Well, and that gets it. 2 years ago, if you'd said who runs the world, I would have said I would have said bankers. They have the money, they create the money. Of course, they own the world, right? If it's been said by former central bankers, if you took the money away, they would just print more and start up again, right? And but it appears to me as though the power shift to Silicon Valley is at least a parallel power structure, if not an emerging power structure. And so are guys like Gates and Zuckerberg, are they just pawns, just very, very high ranking pawns? Because Zuckerberg didn't exist before. It's not like he's not like he's a Medici, right? I mean, he hasn't been holding power for very long. So these nouveau riche guys, are they really powerful, or are they just a consequence of what's happening? And they kind of get let it. They're given a seat at the table, right? It's like bringing an activist onto your board of directors at Exxon or something. You're given a seat at the table, but are they calling the shots? I just don't know.
You look at what's going on with the currencies, and I wonder if Silicon Valley, with this corporate and crypto battle between central bank issued currencies and the crypto side and the role that plays in a technocracy, it seems like there's so many eddies and cross currents going on. I can't make sense of it between the two, the Fed coin or the Bitcoin crowd or the hard currency crowd.
Well, I think the low level retail hodlers have no idea they're part of a very big geopolitical game. So the crypto story. Now, I'm not anti-hodler, but I do think that they could easily get duped. The cryptos guys could really rudely discover that, as they say, the call's coming from inside the house. And the first, supposedly, and again, I haven't done real crypto homework. The hodlers want me to. They say, oh, you got to do your homework and then you'll become a hodler, right? My brain doesn't have the bandwidth. But supposedly the first white paper on cryptos with the word coin mentioned something like 57 times. So it clearly was a crypto paper, were by 3 NSA guys.
Yeah.
And then you hear the stories, which I think are probably true, but I don't know. But most of the Silicon Valley companies or angel investors were CIA, DARPA, guys like that. So at some point, the very origins and the foundations, for example, let's say Zuckerberg was not founded by the CIA. I don't think there's a chance that Zuckerberg would try to run his organization without being 100% consistent with the national security state. There's no chance that he would try to buck that. And so I think these guys are beholden, whether they were actually founded by them, which I think is probably true, but all these Silicon Valley companies all have, I think, intelligence connections. Not always U.S. based. I think the Mossad has huge connections into Silicon Valley, but Israel has tremendous tech industry, right? There's no chance that Israel's tech industry is anything but founded on defense. Right? There's no chance, right? And China's never going to sell us a chip without embedded stuff in it. They're never going to sell us a chip that hasn't been impregnated with whatever they can and want to impregnate it with. And so the whole digital world is certainly part of the geopolitical positioning. Maybe it's wars, maybe it's just a power struggle, maybe it's just a crime family like where they're just kind of positioning for their territory. I just don't know.
Just want to pull it back to what you mentioned earlier, this effort to break down the nation state borders and
right.
shift us into regionalism. And it's the two causes right now, the champion calls are pan-national, but they're right. They're not people. No, so you don't have to have, you can wage a war and you can ask people to participate and suffer in some ways and not mm-hmm. have to, have them as part of something, a cause célèbre and as you said, climate change and the next great one is the COVID.
It's a real tribalism. You don't agree with me, therefore you're a bad person. I'm not sure the anti-vaxxers think that in reverse. I don't think they do, because I think that tends to be the sort of the libertarian side of thinking, right? The anti-vaxxers don't want someone telling them what to do, and therefore they're less prone to tell people what to do.
Yeah.
But so we've got all these religious flavored causes that people, they think they're so smart that they don't endorse religion when in fact they're part of one.
Yeah.
So the space race. Well, what was the space race? Well, the space race was another narrative. They wanted to build missiles to bomb the shit out of Russia or somebody or whatever, but it's not an easy sell. And so what you do is you say, oh, we're going to go to the moon. And everyone just said, oh, fabulous. And so we demonized Russia. We said Russia's beating us on the race to the moon, and we got to get to the moon. And it's such a wildly great human achievement that it's so marketable. And so now you got something like climate change. So in a nutshell, what I think has happened here.
Can I just stop you with one thing? Those aren't mutually exclusive. So climate change has some factors, but then what is being weaponized on the back end to really
to exploit it.
But sorry to interrupt, but I think I just wanted to clarify that with you, because I think we both agree that these are things, but then what are they being weaponized to do? Right.
And so if I had to, for those of you who think I'm nuts about the climate change, I wrote about it in 2019. Search my name, year in review, 2019. You'll find a chapter on climate change. It's about 25 pages. I think it holds up brilliantly. It's one of my proudest chunks of writing. And what you discover is that the first narrative falls apart immediately. And the first narrative is that no one who's got half a brain doesn't believe in it, right? No one with any credibility doesn't believe in it. And I was a believer in that model until I got challenged to dig in. And the first thing I discovered is there are globally prominent scientists all over the world who not only question the validity of the models, but think the entire thing is a hoax. So this notion that there's no credible scientists who don't sign off on it in sort of broad brushstrokes is a lie. It's a serious lie. And then by the time you're done and you find that melting glaciers are leaving 1,200-year-old trees behind, and you go, they must have grown there, right? The hockey stick turns out to be a complete fraud, best I can tell. Starving polar bears, the polar bear populations increased threefold since the 1970s. The ocean acidification is falling like a house of cards this year. They can't replicate the data. The ice sheets are not shrinking globally. There's just so much of the story that's a lie. What is it? Well, I think it's possible in the technocratic world that people with a bird's eye view. Now, I now have to kind of give them credit for being rational and thoughtful and knowledgeable. And I'm also the same guy who will quickly dismiss them as idiots. But if you can see that the world is heading towards an unwinnable situation where resources can't hold up. By the way, in a 1984 climate report by Exxon, which was viewed by the activists as evidence Exxon knew climate change was occurring, that's not what the report did. It just surveyed the literature of climate change. That's all it did. It was a very scholarly, thoughtful surveying of what the state of the art in the literature in 1984 was. In that, they said they thought that it wouldn't become a problem before we ran out of oil. I'd never seen a major oil company say that. And so that was the punchline for me in that whole document. They said before we run out of oil. So let's say resources can't hold up. Let's say we're making lithium batteries, but we know the lithium supplies can't hold up. Let's say we know the phosphate supplies can't hold up. Let's say we know we fracked the world pretty hard and we're going to the bottoms of the oceans to find oil. We can't do it. China's emerging. India's emerging. We can't do it. You can't just go out and say, oh, by the way, you're all just going to starve to death. There'd be a big problem. So what do? You say, oh, we have to save the world. That's your narrative right there. We have to save the world. Therefore, as the World Economic Forum says, you won't eat as much meat. You will live with less. You will not own anything and you'll be happy without mentioning who's going to own it. Things like that. So that's the technocratic world. They're using technocracy to usher in a highly organized society, which I would call communism 2.0, because they think we can't keep doing what we've been doing. And I think the environmentalists agree, but I don't think the environmentalists are ready for what's coming. I don't think their image is we all go back to hunter-gatherer utopia, and they're about to discover that Hunger Games is a better model.
Yeah. There's so many different angles on that one, and I agree with a lot that you said. And the growth model, I suppose, is sustainable for the West that are only at most let's call it 500 million, the United States, North America, and Europe. It becomes quickly unsustainable if China, the rising power of China and India, with their billion plus people, attain the same living standards that we have. So your proposal that this is getting ahead of it. At the end of the day, I do struggle with: is this going to be a problem? Because we're going to need the West, quote unquote, the West, right, to cap our consumption models. But that also means that the rest, i.e., China, India, Sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, all the rest of it will also be capped. And what does that mean?
And they've overtly stated, you're not going to tell us to cap after you consume the resource, right?
Yeah.
Putin said it, Xi Jinping has said it. Like they said, don't tell us to stop developing now. You're dreaming,
Yeah.
right? And so I have another thought. This year, again, I've been writing furiously, and it could be what I call the green van effect, but there's a formal name which I can never remember. I should just try to memorize it. That basically says once you notice something, then you see it everywhere, right? I call it the green van effect because you buy a green van and then you say, everyone owns a damn green van. This is amazing, right? So you finally notice something that was in plain sight. I'm seeing supply chain disruptions, not of the kind that everyone is talking about, but just in general, going from, overt ones like Biden shutting down a pipeline and then eventually having to beg the Saudis to pump oil, right? But the Mississippi River getting clogged up from a bridge problem, the Suez Canal getting clogged up by a boat, fires at refineries, right? I swear I'm picking up an unusual number of supply chain disruptions. Europe has a terrible problem with energy supply right now. I have this grand theory of that too. What about, and what's noticeably missing from the climate change debate and from the supply chain problem debate and everything is nuclear. Yeah. And everyone I know who's got a head on their shoulders, which is defined by someone who agrees with me, thinks we got to go to nuclear.
Yeah.
And thinks we can do it safely. Now, things like Fukushima didn't help, but I think you could put nuke plants in Wyoming and do it safely. And one of the thoughts I had is that let's say the global elite, the World Economic Forum, the people who want to control our lives know this. France is building more nukes, by the way. Macron just announced it. They're going to build more nukes. I'm told we are building nukes in this country, and it's just being done very quietly. And I haven't done my homework, but I could believe it. Gates, I think it was Gates and Bezos, one of the big gazillionaires said, we're going to build a nuke in 7 years. So I'm getting hints of it. I'm investing in uranium miners to somewhat in the belief we got to get there. What if their plan is, look, we can't sell the nukes unless we show the world what life was like without energy? So what happens if we have the next COVID-like crisis, which is a freeze your ass in your house, your pipes freezing, right? Chaos. Because we can't get energy.
$10 gallon oil.
$10 a gallon oil, and you can't get what you want because fossil fuels are not available and this and that. And all of a sudden they say, and then pretty soon you will get the whole world saying, okay, please vaccinate me and please build nukes.
Yeah, I mean, you already have our former central banker extraordinaire, Mark Carney, saying, if you're not talking about nuclear, you're not serious.
And that's one of the things that he says that I agree with.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot to disagree with him, but no, that's really interesting because how do you, you need it to hit people where it hurts first before you implement the real change.
You need to get them to beg, right? This is if you look at CIA interrogation techniques, you sort of break the guy down and then you build them back up. You probably know much more about this than me, but you somehow have to tear down part of the structure before you rebuild it. And energy problems would naturally lead to let's build nukes because they've polled people and said, how much are you willing to forfeit for climate change? And the polls show that if they'll spend $10 a month to promote climate change, to stop climate change. But above that, they go, no, that's too much now, right? It's not worth
paper straws.
That's right. And if the climate change problem is real and roaring along, well, first of all, I've yet to identify someone who has been able to convince me of something awful that will happen. I've not heard a story where they say, okay, if climate change is ripping along by the year 2100, which by the way, I'm going to be dead, hopefully. But no one's been able to say, and here's the awfulness. And usually it has to do with some place being underwater, right? Usually some coastal thing. And I go, the coast is getting squeegeed every year. The buildings that are on the coast now weren't there 100 years ago. The buildings on the coast 100 years from now aren't going to be the ones that are here now. We will put up seawalls. We will, and it won't cost $150 trillion, which is the projected cost to mitigate climate change. So the climate change scam, those who think, why would they lie to us? $150 trillion. It's already $1 trillion a year business. Big oil is not contributing almost any money to the anti-climate change narrative. People always say, that's big oil paying that 80-year-old guy bitching about the climate narrative. That old guy is bitching about the climate narrative because he's got nothing to lose. Big oil, I have never found any serious money. I've not found a paper trail that leads from big oil to climate denial. I've not been able to find that thread. I can find you a thread where trillions are going into the climate industrial complex. Trillions. Whole departments on campuses, solar panels, wind farms, you name it. I talk to guys on Wall Street who build wind farms in foreign countries and make a ton of money. And they go, I don't think they're doing anything, but I'm making a ton of money.
Yeah.
So it's narrative.
Yeah. And this goes to the green economy.
Right.
Now, how do you create a green economy if you don't control the currency and the ability to put value on anything that you deem green? And that's where it gets really twisted for me. It
gets very twisted.
Wood actually did a really good job. Sorry, go ahead.
I think he did. No. Well, if you don't interrupt me, no one will. So you really do have to interrupt me. Someone sent me an email saying, "I love your podcast. Don't step on your host." Right? And I said, "It's been my defect since I was born, right? Since I learned to talk." So go ahead. Wood did a great job.
He did a great job, especially drawing that together. And this is where I struggle with the nature of currency and fiat currency, is that when currency becomes politicized, you can put value on anything and assign value to anything. And yes, some will argue that it has consequences, but really, if you can cap the volatility of social cohesion and the direction of where the spigot funnels to, then you're fine.
Well, that's an interesting way of phrasing it, capping the volatility of social cohesion. What you are saying is you don't actually have to control, for example, you don't have to contain secrets. You only have to contain the response to the secret. So, for example, this year we witnessed the Pandora Papers that showed that there's huge amounts of high profit fraud all over the world. That story lasted about a week.
And that became exceptionally evident when to even talk about the origins of it. What I struggle with most, everything that we do is risk assessment. Everything is based on risk to oneself, mm-hmm. risk to the public, mm-hmm. Et cetera. And to look at the risks, it's pretty damn low when you look at all the other risks to society. When you look at, how many people are dying from opioid deaths? How many people are dying from diabetes? And I hate going down this road, but no one within the mainstream complex, let alone our politicians or a political class leading it, is willing to deal with any of that stuff. And it goes back to your cause célèbre of a non-human cause that we can get behind, and that's the COVID.
You'll probably have to edit this shit out, but
yeah, it's
at least for chatting.
Yeah, what I'll do is, do you want to chat offline? We'll call it at that. I think we got it.
Whatever you want. We can keep talking. We can go offline. Whatever you want.
Let's go offline.
Okay.
I'd like to talk about some other stuff. I'll just
leave this offline part in your video so that the people can see that we just said, okay, we got to get out of here.
Yeah. Let's talk about the other thing. Dr. Collum, thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure.